Good evening, I'm Muteli Edwards. A warm welcome to East Asia tonight. For this edition, starting slightly later than usual, following CNA's Singapore Budget Special. And here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea's parliament pushes for Yoon Suk Yeol's removal as the suspended president's impeachment trial nears its end, with warnings that he could again impose martial law or undermine the constitution if reinstated. A Chinese minister has met more than 1,000 alleged scam workers at the Thailand-Myanmar border as part of a joint operation to crack down on transnational crime syndicates. Taipei reaffirms support for free navigation in the Taiwan Strait by democratic and friendly nations, while cautioning against misinterpretations of the recent passage of a Canadian warship. And in business news, South Korea devises a set of support measures for export firms expected to suffer under higher U.S. tariffs. And also in East Asia tonight, China aims to introduce train services built specially for the comfort of the elderly, hoping that they will travel more and spend more. The impeachment trial of South Korea's president hitting the final stretch. The Constitutional Court hearing a summary of arguments today before judges decide whether to remove Yoon Suk Yeol from office over his martial law decree back in December. President Yoon making a quick U-turn, arriving at the court, but then leaving to go back to the Seoul detention center before the hearing even started. Yoon had argued that South Korea was in fact in a state of national emergency when he declared martial law. Now, aside from the impeachment trial, the suspended leader is also facing criminal charges of insurrection. Right, let's dive deeper into these latest developments in South Korea with CNA's Grace Shin. Now, Grace, we know that Mr. Yoon, he returned to the Seoul detention center even before his hearing commenced. The trial still went on as planned. What were some of the key issues being discussed?
Oteli, today's hearing was a chance for both the National Assembly and President Yoon's legal team to sum up their arguments, and here are the three main points each side are disagreeing upon. One, whether the declaration of the martial law was, in fact, constitutional. The National Assembly labeled President Yoon's decision as an exploitative use of presidential power, dismantling democracy. Under the Constitution, a martial law is only allowed when the country is, in fact, in a national emergency or advent of war or treason. And the National Assembly reiterated how there wasn't enough evidence to claim that South Korea was in any of these scenarios. And President Yoon and his legal team countered that the Constitution allows the president to impose a martial law as a high-level executive act that isn't subject to judicial review. In other words, it's really up to the president and his aides to determine a national crisis situation. And they've been reiterating how the martial law wasn't reflective of the hawkish, authoritative motives in the 80s before South Korea transitioned from a military dictatorship to democracy. Rather, the short-lived martial law on December 3rd was more of a preliminary gesture warning the general public that South Korea was heading into a state of emergency. And Yoon's team's evidence being nobody was hurt in the process compared to hundreds killed in demonstrations back in the 80s. Yoon and his team also claimed that South Korea was in a state of emergency ever since the general elections gave the opposition Democratic Party a majority of seats in parliament, and this allegedly made it close to impossible for Yoon and his party to pass key budget plans or laws necessary to address urgent national tasks. Now, on to the second argument. The National Assembly criticized Yoon's decision to dispatch troops to the National Assembly on the day he imposed the martial law, claiming that he was well aware of Article 77, Clause 5 of South Korea's constitution, and that clause stipulates that when the majority of the National Assembly demands the repeal of a martial law, the president must comply and revoke. Now, the National Assembly pointed out how President Yoon had deployed 2,466 military and police forces immediately after his announcement, and they said this was to stop lawmakers from voting against his martial law. In other words, they're claiming this was Yoon's attempt to stop all political activity. But President Yoon's side argued that deploying troops to the streets was for order maintenance. And the third final main argument presented by the National Assembly was President Yoon infringing South Korea's electoral system. And what they were referring to was Yoon dispatching martial law forces to investigate the National Election Commission without a warrant. And President Yoon justified this by saying that the NEC had been uncooperative before when he had addressed his concerns over election fraud. And to that, the National Assembly rebutted that the government could have used police or the National Intelligence Service rather than deploying military forces. And during today's trial, when the National Assembly presented investigative records from military officials who were involved, Yoon's team strongly objected by saying that it was against the law to present testimony from individuals who had not appeared as witnesses at the risk of weak credibility. However, the acting Chief Justice rejected this claim, saying that the court had already accepted this evidence at their fourth session, and the objection made by Yoon's team was a bit too late.
So, Grace, we've heard the three main points that you've listed there. So what's going to happen from now on?
Well, the Constitutional Court has decided to proceed with the 10th hearing scheduled for this Thursday. And this comes amid Yoon and his legal team requesting to postpone the session. And they've been citing scheduling concerns. Yoon's first hearing on insurrection charges at the criminal court and his detention revocation hearing are scheduled both for this Thursday at the Seoul Central District Court. And given that many of Yoon's impeachment trial lawyers are also handling his criminal defense, his legal team had explained that there's just not enough time for them to prepare for both trials or a proper defense. They also said there would be difficulty in lining up witnesses' schedules, but the Constitutional Court today rejected this request of changing dates. Instead, they agreed to delay their impeachment trial hearing by an extra hour. So in summation, the 10th hearing will go on as scheduled, but it would start at 3 p.m. local time instead of 2 p.m. And the key agenda to look out for Thursday's hearing is hearing from testimonies from three key witnesses, and they are Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, former National Intelligence Service Director Hong Jang-won, and Cho Ji-ho, who is the Commissioner General of the Korean National Police Agency. And the court had previously rejected Yoon's request to summon Han as a witness. However, after strong objections from Yoon's legal team, the court reversed its decision, but observers are dubious as to why Yoon's legal team re-summoned Han, because if you recall, during his last testimony, the Prime Minister added weight to the National Assembly's claim that Yoon's martial law decree was in fact unconstitutional from beginning to end. By law, a cabinet meeting has to be held officially before a president decides to impose the martial law, but Prime Minister Han testified that there had been no formal cabinet meeting. He even testified that it was unlawful for Yoon to impose this. Now, as for former National Intelligence Service Director Hong Jang-won, Hong had already testified as a witness in the fifth trial session. And at the time, he had said he received orders from the president to arrest everyone. He also specified that he received a list of individuals to be arrested from former Defense Counterintelligence Command Yeo In-young. And this claim was later refuted by National Intelligence Service Director Cho Tae-yong, who also appeared as a witness in the impeachment hearing. And at the time, he criticized Hong as being not credible. But finally, eyes are on whether Commissioner Cho Ji-ho, who has been detained since December, will actually attend the hearing this time around, because Cho has been citing health concerns. He's battling blood cancer. He's been asked to appear in front of court, but he has never done so as a witness. But the court has currently issued a warrant requesting his appearance, and he is considered a key witness because many are thinking that he might provide testimony as to whether President Yoon actually ordered the blocking of National Assembly members' access to Parliament, or if he was actually instructed to remove lawmakers from the building or arrest politicians. Now, with the addition of the 10th hearing, Yoon's impeachment trial, which was initially expected to end by late February or early March, is now projected to stretch beyond mid-March.
Many thanks for that deep dive, Grace Shin there, breaking down the latest in South Korean politics. Now, in other news, a Chinese minister has reportedly met with more than 1,000 alleged scam workers at the border between Thailand and Myanmar. Well, Thai authorities say the meeting was part of a joint operation with China and Myanmar to crack down on scam syndicates. Now, hundreds of alleged workers were rescued in the Myawaddy district in Myanmar near the Thai border. Many of the workers are reportedly from China, with some from Indonesia, India, and various countries in Africa. Now, those rescued are expected to be returned to their home countries soon.
Our cell phones, we need to talk to our family that we are coming home, and we have no contact with them yet. But I think we can go home as soon as possible, and that will be really good for us.
The border region where many scam compounds are believed to be stationed is patrolled by Myanmar's Border Guard Forces, a militia of the Karen ethnic minority. Now, yesterday it said it was preparing to transfer 10,000 people linked to the cyber scams back to Thailand. The spokesperson says they will carry out the deportations in groups of 500 per day. The militia chief has denounced the scam centers and says that they are cooperating with Thai police.
လောဝလူမောင်ကိုနိဗ္ဗာန်နဲ့ဆက်မှုနဲ့ပတ်သက်တာကိုလောဝကျွန်တော်လက်မခံတဲ့တင်မှာကျွန်တော်လည်းပြန်လဲဖန်စီပို့ဆောင်ရတာလဲအခုလက်စစ်ထိုင်းစစ်တပ်နဲ့စမတောင်းရှိတဲ့ထိုင်းစစ်တပ်တွေရောထိုင်းရဲတွေရော
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has promised to work with Thailand and Myanmar to fight cross-border crimes and bring their citizens home.
中国正在同泰国、缅甸等国积极开展双多边合作，综合施策，标本兼治，合力封堵不法分子在有关国家流窜作案，共同铲除网赌电诈毒瘤，维护人民生命财产安全和地区国家交往合作秩序。
Earlier, we spoke with Jason Tower from the United States Institute of Peace, and he explains how people can find themselves caught up in these scam centers.
The trafficking networks that are targeting individuals to bring into the scam syndicates have gotten more and more sophisticated in terms of how they're going about this. You saw that over the past couple of years, the most common way of doing it was a job advertisement on social media, which might link to a website about what appears to be a legitimate company in Southeast Asia. And you would then have kind of a process of applying for a job. The recruiter would eventually, if you're offered the job, arrange for airfare, arrange for airport pickup, and then individuals upon arrival in a transit country would get trafficked across the border into Myanmar, that often being arrival in Bangkok. Now, you've seen over the past year in particular that the modality of trafficking has become more and more sophisticated. Now you're starting to see a lot of very customized and targeted approaches to individuals, often maybe even people who are not openly seeking jobs, but you'll see where, for example, around this recent case of an actor that was trafficked into Myanmar through Thailand, where criminal actors had actually used someone who had worked in the film industry in China for more than 7 years, went through that person's social network and identified an individual who thought he was actually going off to Thailand to try out for a part in a movie. You can sort of see how the trafficking is becoming more and more sophisticated in terms of the outreach through this case.
Now, there are all sorts of scams going on here: false romantic ploys, bogus investment pitches, and illegal gambling schemes. Can you provide some numbers as to how much money is stolen from victims?
Yeah, so last year, USIP, we had a senior study group that looked at this as a phenomenon globally. And according to our research, the scam centers based in Southeast Asia that are perpetrating these scams, which seek to really clean out victims entirely of all of their worldly possessions by establishing psychological control over a victim. Sometimes they're romance scams. Sometimes they involve building trust with victims in other forms of ways. That they're stealing in the range of 65 billion US dollars per year from a global population. That's just, kind of from these scam syndicates that are operating in these compounds in Southeast Asia, with Myanmar being one of the 3 countries that are a major hub for this form of activity.
And in business news, Shein looks to calm investors after the US ended duty-free treatment of low-value e-commerce packages from China and hiked tariffs. Plus, the world's largest mining company cuts its interim dividend to the lowest in 8 years and warns that trade tensions pose a risk to growth. Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has unveiled a 143 billion Singapore dollar budget, and he calls it a budget for all Singaporeans in the country's 60th year of independence. Now, it contains measures aimed at tackling the rising cost of living, as well as helping businesses and workers remain competitive amid challenging times ahead. Now, Mr. Wong says that Singapore can no longer compete on cost. Instead, it needs to produce high-value solutions for the world. And this can be done through boosting R&D efforts in technology and innovation, for example. Now, this budget also seeks to help workers upskill and businesses to support them in doing so. Singapore will also boost investments into the nation's infrastructure and expand access to clean energy. In terms of fiscal position, Singapore did better than expected for the past financial year. Mr. Wong pointed to the upside in corporate income tax, now the largest contributor to the total revenue.
We will continue to monitor fiscal trends closely and update our medium-term projections. In the meantime, we will spend responsibly and ensure resources are allocated effectively. If and when there are near-term fiscal upsides, we will put the resources to good use, including for our social and economic needs.
Now, turning our attention back to East Asia, the South Korean government is set to support exporters with a whole set of measures. And this comes amid global uncertainties sparked by U.S. tariffs, including reciprocal levies on trading partners. Now, the measures include export voucher packages to small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as a trade finance scheme that's powered with a record $253 billion. Now, this will help provide liquidity to local businesses operating a high-interest rate environment and dealing with the volatility in the exchange rate. Now, exports are a key growth driver in the country. They rose by more than 8% last year to reach a record $684 billion. But the government anticipates that the first half of this year could be very difficult, given the trade policies of the Trump administration in the White House. Headwinds could also come from continued competition in advanced industries, as well as global oversupply in some sectors. Well, the government also plans to create 5 new overseas export centers, including in Vietnam, as well as Mexico and Brazil. And that's to help look for opportunities to diversify trade. The world's largest mining company, BHP, says that weakening Chinese demand is largely to blame for its lowest interim dividend in 8 years. While the 50 US cent per share payout is down 30% from the same time just a year earlier. Underlying half-year profit was about $5 billion, down a worse than expected 23%. The company has suffered from weaker prices of commodities such as iron ore and coal, stemming mainly from China's slowdown in economic activity. Now, the country's property crisis has also upended the construction sector, which in turn has slashed its demand for steel and therefore the iron ore that's used to make it. China is the top metals consumer in the world, and it's still at a delicate stage in its economic recovery. But BHP's CEO Mike Henry is optimistic, pointing to signs of early recovery in local demand. And he also notes that Beijing's stimulus policies are building momentum for the coming year, but warns of the possible harm to global growth that could arise from a trade war. Shein is attempting to calm investors who feel that the Chinese fast fashion retailer will have to raise prices after Washington's move to end the duty-free provision for imports from China worth less than $800. Now, in a letter seemed aimed at reassuring investors, Shein said that it will maintain its edge in a fiercely competitive environment for discount apparel in the U.S., its biggest market. The firm says it is investing in supply chain advancements to boost efficiency and responsiveness, as well as better logistics to ensure faster and more reliable deliveries. The end of de minimis, which is a rule that had allowed American shoppers to avoid paying customs on most Shein purchases, was widely expected. But Trump's executive order gave barely 3 days' notice for the complex international supply chains to adapt, causing delays to customers' orders as packages piled up at airports. Now, BYD's move to offer free smart driving features across most of its lineup has angered a lot of its customers who bought the vehicle prior to the announcement. Now, nearly 5,000 disgruntled buyers have lodged their complaints online in the past week, saying that they had overpaid for their cars. Now, the complaints are one of the ripple effects of a prolonged price war and hyper-competitiveness in the Chinese market. And that's as automakers slash prices, offer free features or incentives, or roll out new models at a pace that's faster than other countries. Just 2 years ago, U.S. automaker Tesla, shortly after it cut prices in a move that started the price war, saw hundreds of Tesla owners assemble at the company's showrooms and distribution centers in China, seeking rebates and credits. A Chinese search engine Baidu beat quarterly revenue estimates, indicating some recovery in the Chinese advertising market. A revenue for the 3 months ended December came in at $4.7 billion. That's a smaller than expected drop on year. Now, net income for the same period came to around $717 million, also above estimates. Well, Baidu has offset losses through its AI cloud segment's growth, but it faces multi-pronged challenges. On search, it's losing eyeballs and advertising dollars to social apps, including Xiaohongshu and ByteDance's Douyin. And it's also combating an economic downturn. On generative AI, DeepSeek's breakthrough undercuts Baidu's years-long approach to push proprietary technology. In a strategic shift amid intensifying competition, it announced last week that its next-generation AI model, Ernie, will become open source from June 30th. Baidu is among the front-runners in Chinese AI investment. Now, its shares closing in the green in Hong Kong today, but the slide yesterday has wiped $2.4 billion off its market value. Well, the share tanked after the founder of the Chinese search engine giant was not spotted at a rare meeting between President Xi Jinping and corporate leaders. Our Chinese markets ending mixed a day after President Xi Jinping held a rare meeting with some of the country's biggest business magnates. The upbeat sentiment driven by expectations that the meeting will give a boost to private companies. Hang Seng tech shares listed in Hong Kong hit a 3-year high yesterday following the symposium, closing up about 1.6%. On the mainland, the benchmark indices closed in the red. Shanghai minus 31.34 and Shenzhen minus 1.61%. China's state planner says that it will be implementing policies that help the private sector. It will be breaking down investment barriers, including revising its negative list for market access. Now, this is a list which restricts investment in some sectors. Authorities are also going to promote open and fair access to infrastructure in competitive sectors and major national scientific research infrastructure to the private sector. Diverse routes, more handrails, and medically trained staff. We'll be taking a look at China's push to design train services specifically for the aging population. And the head of the IAEA back in Japan to monitor the arduous process of decommissioning the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. All that coming up after this break. You're watching East Asia tonight. South Korea's embattled President Yoon Suk Yeol briefly attends his impeachment trial, but left before the hearing even began. Parliament's lawyers claimed in the hearing that Mr. Yoon could try to impose martial law again if he is reinstated. Taipei reaffirms support for free navigation in the Taiwan Strait by democratic and friendly nations, while cautioning against misinterpretations of the recent passage of a Canadian warship. And a Chinese minister has met more than 1,000 alleged scam workers at the Thailand-Myanmar border as part of a joint operation to crack down on transnational crime syndicates. Now, by most accounts, scam centers are a huge, lucrative industry in Myanmar, giving it a global hub status. Employing at least 120,000 people, it is part of what some dub a scamdemic in Asia, run by organized crime gangs. Now, a recent UN report listed the tactics that are often used. It could be a sophisticated dating advertisement on Telegram as far away as Japan, or cheap deals posted on Facebook, drawing victims to websites or to download apps run by scammers. It could also be a get-rich scheme using deep fakes of well-known personalities. Well, concerns are mounting about crimes driven by artificial intelligence, deep fake-related content increasing 600%. The modus operandi is pretty simple. Contact unsuspecting people by text or online messaging apps. Interact and engage to build trust, and then convince them to invest in schemes that are fraudulent. The UN says the so-called scam compounds or scam farms in Southeast Asia raked in $37 billion in 2023. The gangs, said to be from China, set up scam centers in poorer neighboring states after Beijing's anti-corruption drive. Now, such centers are apparently flourishing in Myanmar due to protection from armed ethnic groups or the military. One in particular along the Thai border is Sri Khao, which has earned the dubious title of Scam City. In just 8 years, it has grown from a neglected wetland to a resort city with a multi-billion-dollar casino and entertainment complex, all thanks to money from scams. Now, Xu Zhijiang reportedly helmed the company that built it. He is apparently detained in a Thai jail waiting for extradition to China. Now, imagine a network of trains built for the comfort and safety of senior travelers. Well, China is all set to launch what it calls special silver trains covering the entire country by 2027. It's all part of efforts to tap the spending power of one of the world's fastest aging populations. Now, China's state-owned rail operator unveiled an action plan last week. The aim is to promote train services for seniors, featuring diverse routes and rich themes. Now, these trains will also be fitted with medical supplies and more handrails and have specially trained staff on board. Officials say the number of elderly-friendly tourist trains, as well as passenger volume, will rise significantly. Now, China is facing a demographic crunch, but wants to cushion the impact by developing a silver economy.
这一次呢，是以这个银发与旅游列车为切入点，那么把这个银发旅游和这个金融啊、保险呀、交通啊、医疗啊这样一些产业形成融合，来打造以银发经济为核心的整个的产业发展的一个生态。
More than 1 in 5 Chinese, or nearly 300 million people, are above the age of 60, and that is expected to climb in the coming years. China's population shrunk for a third consecutive year in 2024, while the number of marriages fell to an all-time low, despite government efforts to reverse the trend. But there were more babies born last year, the first rise since 2016, and this also marks a rebound from a record low back in 2023. Asia's largest economy is grappling with a weak consumer demand, a historic property slowdown, and an intensifying trade war with the U.S. President Xi Jinping has called for vigorous efforts to boost domestic consumption. The government says the silver economy is projected to hit more than $4 trillion by the year 2035. And for more insights into China's silver economy, we are joined now by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and he is also a China Forum expert. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us on East Asia tonight, this evening. So, as we've mentioned, China's rolling out all these silver trains to tap into the spending power of its aging population. So, Professor, do you think that will actually make a real difference to the economy?
Well, I think the jury is still there. I think it's a good trial on the part of the railway company to at least try to lure elderly people to come out for tourism, for vacationing. And I think there are practical reasons why elderly people are sometimes intimidated on their own to go out for long distance travels. And I think something like this, especially tailored for the elderly, a set of elderly people on a train, making them feel like more of a special treatment, a bit of a celebrity status, I guess, will probably make a difference. So I think it's a good trial, and so I would hope that it's going to be a successful trial, and the more people will come out, elderly people will come out. After all, as you point out, we are having a larger aging population these days, and encouraging them to spend is a driving force of our economy.
Right. And Professor, recently we spoke to Trip.com's CEO, and she told CNA that, elderly travelers, they tend to spend 3 times more than the average tourist. And, the government is talking about the silver economy hitting $4 trillion by 2035. Given all the economic challenges that China is facing right now, do you think that is a realistic goal?
Well, I mean, look at the expenditure patterns of the elderly people. Where do they spend money on, right? They don't go out to the mall to do a lot of shopping, buy clothing, buy apparel stuff. I mean, people at that age don't spend money on that. I mean, there's a limit on how much you can go out, for restaurants, stuff like that. I think vacationing, travel is a major expenditure for a lot of these people. And I think, we need to encourage people to spend on that. I think one thing characterizing China's consumption pattern is that more money is actually spent on things other than dining and wining and buying clothing. It's on other sort of a more cultural applications, stuff like that. So, I think traveling, vacation is something that can potentially make a difference to a fairly large portion of our economy. I mean, these people represent an increasingly large percentage of our population.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but there is this impression that, many older Chinese, they grew up saving every yuan they have. Do you think that there is an opportunity to be transformed into big spenders, or is it a fact of the fact that old habits die hard?
I think they can go to various places. I think increasingly China is developing interesting places for people to go, and I think the competition across different regions, different cities in the travel market, in the tourism market, is just intense. You look at various municipalities and local governments going out of way to try to attract people, and particularly, I think in this case, a specific subset of the population, and I think this could be making a very interesting proposition, value proposition for a lot of elderly people.
Right. So, well, China obviously wants its older residents to spend more, but what else? How would it have to reform its social security net also for that to happen?
Well, I think it's already making a lot of improvement. I think in the old days, people used to have this notion that retirement and spending the lasting years of your life is very much dependent on your children. I think this concept has been changing very rapidly. I think at least for some concern, I think my generation is never going to be banning our children to essentially taking ourselves when we get old. And more people are saving, and more people are living off Social Security payments to plan a meaningful and a colorful and a comfortable retirement life on their own. I think this is a fundamental mindset change in the Chinese culture. And I think this is a very healthy development. And I think the younger generation are more and more moving towards that direction.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Professor, that you can't quite count on your children to be taking care of the elderly these days. But, China, it has a shrinking workforce. It has an aging population. So who's going to foot the bill for long-term elderly care?
Well, I think a lot of the elderly care functions are being marketized. In other words, it's actually relying on the market, the services provided by the market to take care of elderly people. It's a huge market essentially. I think a lot of companies and organizations are investing in that area to try to tap into that market. Essentially providing a better lifestyle, a better experience for people, when they get to that age.
So, there is a real fear that when it comes to aging crisis, if that's not being handled well, it could possibly become the biggest drag on its economic future. So, what do you think the policymakers right now, what do they need to address? What's their priority?
Yeah, well, the Chinese government is very cognizant of this issue. Actually, they're actively developing policies and developing measures to try to cultivate that market. And investment in the elderly industry, the silver economy industries are very much welcome. I don't see a problem at all. I think that in the future we're going to see more and more companies investing in this, it's going to be a very much developed market, just like in industrialized countries.
All right, many thanks for your time and thoughts, Professor John Gong, University of International Business and Economics. Now, Taiwan says that it supports free navigation by what it calls democratic and friendly countries in the Taiwan Strait, and warns that China is misusing such sailing as a reason for its own purposes.
我们从整体的台海的状况里面看得出来，所谓的联合战备警巡，基本上的目的就是对于 我们来包含台湾、包含周边的国家来做一个威慑的动作，那它有它的政治目标，用所谓其他国家基建通过，这只是当做一个借口。我们不认为这是一个非常是它真正的一个原因。
Taiwan's comment came a day after China condemned a Canadian warship for sailing through the sensitive strait. Ships from the U.S. Navy, along with other allied countries, occasionally travel through the strait, which they consider to be an international waterway. Separately, Taiwan has welcomed a revision of a U.S. Department fact sheet that removed language opposing the island's independence. That change drew sharp criticism from Beijing yesterday. One official from the island says the move reflects the close and amicable partnership between Taiwan and the United States. Taiwan is reportedly considering a multi-billion-dollar arms purchase from the U.S. in the face of continued military pressure from China. That's according to Reuters, which spoke to several sources who confirmed that Taipei is in talks with Washington. Well, the arms deal is meant to demonstrate to the U.S. that Taiwan is committed to its defense. It is said to include coastal defense cruise missiles and HIMARS rockets. One source estimates that the package is worth at least $8 billion. The White House has not commented on the matter. U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, though, had previously stated he wants weapons delivery to Taiwan to be sped up. Well, the island has not mentioned the weapons purchase specifically. Instead, the Defense Ministry says it is focused on shoring up defenses. The Philippines says a helicopter belonging to the Chinese Navy performed dangerous maneuvers today, flying close to its aircraft over the South China Sea. Well, this is the latest in a long-running series of back and forth between Manila and Beijing concerning the disputed Scarborough Shoal. The Philippine Coast Guard says its plane was conducting what it called a maritime domain awareness flight when a Chinese helicopter flew as close as 3 meters away, endangering the pilots and passengers. The Chinese military has hit back, saying that it was actually the Philippine plane that intruded into China's airspace over Scarborough Shoal, violating China's sovereignty. Well, the leader of Cook Islands has defended a strategic partnership deal signed with China, saying that it offers opportunities in trade, infrastructure, and the sustainable use of ocean resources. Prime Minister Mark Brown urged his country not to depend on handouts from Big Brother, in a reference to New Zealand, and choose instead to stand on its own 2 feet. The Cook Islands is located between Hawaii and New Zealand. It is an independent state with political links to Wellington, which provides some budget support and commits to defend its population of about 15,000 people. New Zealand was concerned about the deal with China because it was not consulted. The Cook Islands has since unveiled its 5-year action plan with China. Beijing will give a one-time grant of about $4 million, and the deal covers areas from deep-sea mining to education scholarships, but excludes security ties. Wellington says it looks forward to the release of all the pacts signed on that trip. Cooperation on security matters was not explicitly mentioned, but greater maritime collaboration could raise concerns over the potential military use of information and marine infrastructure. China is vying for influence in the strategically important Pacific, where Australia, New Zealand, and the US have traditionally held sway. The Pacific Island nations are at high risk from rising sea levels, and Mr. Brown says they are looking to other countries to fill the gap after President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, AI chatbot Grok is out with its new version. And its boss, Elon Musk, says Grok 3 is far more powerful than its predecessor. Plus, Japan ramps up its target for cutting greenhouse gases. But climate activists say it's still too low to help the world limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Some news making headlines outside of East Asia. A Delta Airlines flight flipped upside down upon landing at Canada's Toronto Pearson Airport, injuring at least 18 people on board. 3 people, including a child, suffered critical injuries.
We just landed. Our plane crashed. It's upside down.
The Bombardier CRJ-900 jet was flying in from Minneapolis and was attempting to land in strong winds when it overturned on the runway. Passengers described a terrifying experience, saying they were rotated sideways before finding themselves hanging upside down in the plane. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, evacuating all 80 on board. Fire crews rushed to the scene as flames erupted. A video from the scene showed the aircraft's fuselage battered with at least one wing detached.
At this time, we believe all our emergency response went as planned. We will, however, be conducting a review. This is an active investigation. It's very early on. It's really important that we do not speculate. What we can say is the runway was dry and there was no crosswind conditions.
Departures and arrivals have resumed after the ground stop was lifted. Several runways were temporarily closed, leading to flight delays and diversions to nearby airports. While most runways have reopened, the two affected by the crash will remain closed for several days as investigators assess the scene. U.S. authorities are assisting Canada's Transportation Safety Board in the probe. Delta has pledged full support to those affected.
We are very grateful that there was no loss of life and relatively minor injuries. We are very focused on the care and the concern and the passengers and the crew, some of whom have already been reunified with their friends and their families.
The cause of the crash remains unclear. Officials are analyzing weather conditions as Toronto had been dealing with high winds and recent snowfall that left more than 20 centimeters of snow in the area. The head of the UN nuclear watchdog is in Japan to visit storage facilities for soil that was contaminated in the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. Rafael Grossi will tour the site for the first time tomorrow. And as part of decontamination efforts, about 13 million cubic meters of soil was removed from the wider Fukushima region. It's being kept at interim storage facilities across a total of 16 square kilometers. Now, if the material is confirmed to be safe, the government will use it to build embankments for roads and railways, among other projects. The remaining soil will be disposed outside of Fukushima. The IAEA is monitoring the decades-long process of decommissioning the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. The nuclear reactors went into meltdown after being hit by a tsunami back in 2011. Japan has set a new target for cutting emissions, pledging to reduce greenhouse gas by 60% from their 2013 levels within the next decade. Now, that's up from its previous target of a 46% cut by 2030. Well, the Environment Ministry says the new plan puts Japan on a straight path towards achieving net zero by 2050. But climate activists say the new target is still too low. They say that Japan must cut emissions by around 80% by 2035 to honor its commitment to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Japan is heavily dependent on imported fossil fuels and is the world's fifth largest emitter of carbon dioxide. Under the new plans, renewables are set to account for 40 to 50% of its electricity generation by 2040. And to do that, it has dropped a previous pledge to reduce reliance on nuclear power as much as possible, nearly 14 years after the Fukushima disaster. Japan's overall power demand is forecast to increase owing to AI data centers and semiconductor chip-making factories. Nearly 200 nations are required to deliver their fresh climate plans by the 10th of February, but only 10 did so on time. Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company xAI has launched the latest version of its chatbot in a live stream event. The world's richest man says that Grok 3 is far more powerful than its predecessor and outpaces rivals in several key benchmarks. Ira Spitzer has a report.
The AI chatbot wars continue to heat up with the launch now of xAI's Grok 3. The founder and CEO of the company, Elon Musk, appeared on a live stream with 3 members of the engineering team, going into more detail about his plans for Grok and the goal of understanding the nature of the universe, saying that wasn't compatible with what he described as political correctness.
We're driven by curiosity about the nature of the universe, and that's also what causes us to be a maximally truth-seeking AI. Even if that truth is sometimes at odds with what is politically correct.
The team then described how they built a massive data center in just a few months, ultimately utilizing 200,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs for compute power, amassing more than 10 times the training hours from Grok 2. The company claimed to have surpassed rivals like OpenAI, Google, and China's DeepSeek in benchmarks such as math, science, and coding. They then asked Grok 3 to create a 3D plot of a launch from Earth, landing on Mars, and then coming back to Earth, as well as creating a game that combined Tetris and Bejeweled. XAI also announced Deep Search, describing it as a hybrid of a search engine with agent capabilities. Now it will be up to users and market watchers to determine where Grok 3 fits into the bigger AI picture, but it's likely to be significant. This all comes in an incredibly competitive time in the AI space. Elon Musk recently made an unsolicited bid to buy rival OpenAI for $97 billion, which OpenAI rejected. However, that bid could potentially complicate OpenAI's plans to fully convert into a for-profit company. And just in the past month, the Chinese firm DeepSeek shook up the AI world with the announcement that it had developed a large language model that was comparable to U.S. competitors, but at a fraction of the cost, challenging existing assumptions about AI development, as well as highlighting China's major advancements in the field. Ira Spitzer, CNA, San Francisco.
And ahead on Asia tonight, here are some of the stories we will also be covering. Officials from the U.S. and Russia have met for talks on the Ukraine war in Saudi Arabia to negotiate an end to the fighting. Ukrainian officials are not a part of the meeting, despite Kyiv earlier stressing that it will not accept the outcomes if it is not present at the talks. Mr. Rubio met with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And now, a Russian state media showed Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arriving in Riyadh. He has ruled out conceding any territory to Kyiv. Vietnam approving its largest plan in decades to overhaul its government and streamline its bloated bureaucracy with an aim to pursue ambitious growth targets. More than 100,000 workers could be affected. 5 ministries will be abolished, while others, including finance and planning, will be merged. 4 government agencies will be scrapped. State-run media is also being curbed, with 5 television channels shut down and multiple newspapers and magazines discontinued. And lawyers supporting Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte filed the first legal challenge against her impeachment, saying the move was rushed through unconstitutionally without oversight. These stories and more on Asia Tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And that wraps up Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for watching.